What if I told you the most dangerous negotiations in modern history just collapsed, and the man who walked out of the room is now being openly targeted for assassination by American media? Stick around, because what happened next will blow your mind. Right now, at this very moment, the world stands on the edge of something catastrophic. In the diplomatic halls of Islamabad, Pakistan, what was supposed to be a historic breakthrough between the United States and Iran has shattered into pieces. The ceasefire that held for weeks, the fragile hope that cooler heads might prevail, all of it gone in a matter of hours. And here is what nobody is telling you. The United States never came to negotiate. They came to dictate. They came to demand total surrender from a nation that just fought them to a standstill for 40 days. If you are captivated by the unfolding geopolitical crisis between the United States and Iran and want to see more analysis that cuts through the mainstream fog, smash that like button and let the algorithm know you are watching. Every click helps keep independent analysis alive in an age of manufactured narratives. Now, let me take you inside what actually happened in those rooms, because the story you are hearing from Western media is not the story that unfolded. For 3 rounds, American and Iranian delegations sat across from each other. J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, led the American side alongside Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. On the Iranian side, Dr. Bagheri Khani, the Speaker of Parliament, led a delegation that included advisors and analysts who have been studying American behavior for decades. And from the very first session, something was wrong. You see, when two nations negotiate after a war, there's typically a recognition of reality. Both sides assess what happened on the battlefield and translate that into diplomatic terms. But the Americans walked into Islamabad as if they had won. They walked in demanding Iran surrender its nuclear program, demanding Iran give up control of the Strait of Hormuz, demanding Iran accept what can only be described as colonial terms. And here is the thing that should make every observer pause. Iran did not lose this war. For 40 days, the combined might of the United States military, backed by Israeli intelligence and Gulf state logistics, threw everything they had at the Islamic Republic. And Iran is still standing. Its government is intact. Its military is intact. Its infrastructure, while damaged, is functioning. So why would any rational actor expect capitulation? The answer lies not in logic, but in ideology. And stay with me here, because this is where the story takes a turn that explains everything happening right now. The people surrounding Donald Trump, the people whispering in his ear about Iran policy, they do not prioritize American interests. I am not saying this as speculation. I am saying this because one of the highest ranking intelligence officials Trump appointed just resigned and said it explicitly. Joe Kent, the second highest ranking intelligence officer in the Trump administration, wrote in his resignation letter that this entire conflict is not about American security. It is about the Israeli regime and the Zionist lobby. Iran, he wrote, is not building a nuclear weapon. Iran is not a threat to the United States, but the forces that control American foreign policy want this war anyway. Think about what that means. A senior American official appointed by Trump himself is telling the world that American soldiers, American resources, American credibility are being sacrificed, not for America, but for a foreign government. And when he said it, he was ignored. When he resigned, the story disappeared within hours, because the media apparatus that shapes American understanding of the world is not interested in that truth. And speaking of media, let me tell you something that should chill you to the bone. Within hours of the negotiations collapsing, the Washington Post, one of the most prestigious newspapers in the United States, published what can only be described as a hit list. They named individual Iranian negotiators. They named advisors. They suggested, in language that lawyers would call plausibly deniable, but everyone else would call a death threat, that the best way to pressure Iran is to eliminate its leadership. This is not commentary from some fringe blog. This is the Washington Post. This is the paper that brought down Richard Nixon, and they are openly calling for the assassination of diplomats during peace negotiations. Now, I want you to hold that thought because we are going to come back to it. But first, let me explain why these negotiations were doomed from the start and why what comes next could reshape the global economy in ways most people are not prepared for. When the Iranian delegation arrived in Islamabad, they carried with them a healthy skepticism. And this skepticism was earned through bitter experience. You see, this is not the first time Iran has negotiated with the United States while bombs were falling. During the 12-day war last year, Iran accepted a ceasefire after Netanyahu literally begged for one. At the time, many Iranians asked, why not continue? Why not press the advantage? The answer was strategic. Iran knew that if the war continued, the United States would enter directly. And Iran also knew that it had never fought a war with these new technologies, these new drone systems, these new missile defense networks. So they used those 8 months between the wars wisely. They reorganized, they adapted, they improved both offensive and defensive capabilities. And then the second war came, and this time it was not Israel alone. This time the United States entered from the beginning. And what happened? Iran held, not only held, but emerged stronger. The systems they developed during that 8 month pause proved effective. The coordination between different branches of their military improved dramatically. And by the time the ceasefire was declared, it was not Iran asking for a pause, it was the coalition. So when Vance walked into those negotiations demanding surrender, the Iranians looked across the table at a man who seemed to be living in an alternative reality, a reality where America had won a decisive victory, a reality where Iran was desperate and broken, but that reality does not exist, and no amount of Washington Post hit pieces can make it exist. Here is where the story gets truly dangerous because with negotiations collapse, the question becomes what happens next. And the answer is almost certainly war, not a limited strike, not a symbolic gesture, war. The Trump administration has been telegraphing their intentions through social media. Trump himself claimed that American forces were already clearing mines from the Strait of Hormuz. He claimed American warships were sailing through freely. He suggested that a naval blockade might be coming if Iran does not comply. And here is what the American public does not understand. A blockade of Iran is an act of war. Under international law, under any reasonable interpretation of sovereignty, preventing a nation from trading with the world is an act of aggression. And Iran has made very clear what its response will be. If the United States blockades Iran, if the United States strikes Iranian infrastructure, Iran will retaliate. And that retaliation will not be limited to American forces. It will extend to every nation that participated in the aggression. It will extend to the oil and gas infrastructure of the Persian Gulf monarchies who provided bases and logistics and overflight rights. It will extend to the pipelines and refineries and export terminals that supply a significant portion of the world's energy. Let me be very specific about what this means. Right now, the global economy is already fragile. The tariff wars have disrupted supply chains. Inflation has eroded purchasing power. Stock markets are volatile. Consumer confidence is shaky. Now imagine what happens when oil prices triple. Imagine what happens when natural gas supplies from the Gulf are disrupted permanently. I say permanently because once that infrastructure is destroyed, it takes years to rebuild. We are not talking about a temporary spike. We are talking about a structural transformation of the global energy market. And here is the part that should terrify anyone paying attention. The people making these decisions do not care. Kushner and Witkoff and the network of pro Israel donors who fund American politics. Their priority is not the American economy. Their priority is not global stability. Their priority is the security and expansion of the Israeli state. And if achieving that goal requires crashing the global economy, they have made peace with that outcome. Now, some of you might be thinking, this sounds extreme. This sounds like conspiracy theory, but I am not asking you to take my word for it. I am asking you to read Joe Kent's resignation letter. I am asking you to look at who funds American political campaigns. I am asking you to notice that every single person advising Trump on Iran policy has deep financial and ideological ties to the Israeli government. This is not hidden. This is not secret. It is simply not discussed in polite company. And while we are discussing uncomfortable truths, let me tell you about the mood on the ground. Because the Western narrative about Iran suggests a population desperate for regime change, desperate for Western intervention, desperate to be liberated by American bombs. But the reports from Pakistan tell a different story. The Iranian delegation, these diplomats and advisors who Western media is openly targeting for assassination, they are treated as heroes, not by government officials, but by ordinary Pakistanis. People stop them in the streets. People ask for photographs. People express solidarity and support. You see, for decades, the Gulf monarchies and their Western backers have spent billions spreading extremist ideologies designed to create hatred between Muslim communities. They funded madrasas that taught sectarian division. They funded media that demonized Iran. They funded politicians who echoed anti Iranian talking points. And yet, when the moment of truth arrives, when ordinary people see with their own eyes what Iran represents, the propaganda falls away because Iran, whatever its flaws, stands for something. It stands for resistance to empire. It stands for sovereignty. It stands for the principle that a nation can chart its own course without bowing to Washington. And this brings me to the broader picture because what's happening with Iran is not an isolated event. It is part of a larger pattern. It is part of America's attempt to maintain global hegemony in a world that is rapidly moving beyond American control. The BRICS nations are building alternative financial systems. China is expanding its influence across Asia and Africa. Russia has proven that it can withstand Western sanctions. And Iran has demonstrated that even the full force of American military power cannot force its submission. The old order is dying. The American century, the post World War II arrangement, where Washington set the rules and everyone else followed, that era is ending. And the violence we are seeing, the wars in Gaza and Lebanon, and now potentially a renewed war with Iran, this violence is the death throes of a system that cannot accept its own decline. But here is what the empire does not understand. You cannot bomb your way to legitimacy. You cannot sanction your way to respect. You cannot assassinate your way to victory. Every attack on Iran strengthens Iranian resolve. Every massacre in Gaza creates a new generation of resistance. Every lie from Western media pushes more of the global South toward alternative sources of information. Now, let me bring this back to the immediate situation because the next few days and weeks are critical. The ceasefire that existed between the United States and Iran is effectively over. The negotiations have failed. The American delegation has left Islamabad, and the war machine is already spinning up again. What should we expect? First, expect an escalation of rhetoric. Expect more articles in the Washington Post and New York Times calling for aggressive action. Expect more think tank reports warning about Iranian nuclear progress. Expect more unnamed officials leaking stories about imminent threats. This is the prelude to war. This is how consent is manufactured. Second, expect false flags. I do not say this lightly, but the historical record is clear. When empires want war, they create pretexts. The Gulf of Tonkin, Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, Syrian chemical attacks. The pattern is well established. So when you see a dramatic incident in the coming weeks, an attack on American forces, an explosion at a Gulf facility, something that demands immediate retaliation, ask yourself who benefits. Ask yourself whether the evidence is being examined or simply accepted. Third, expect economic chaos. Even before the first bombs fall, markets will react to the increased probability of conflict. Oil futures will spike. Defense stocks will rise. Consumer confidence will fall, and ordinary people, the people who did not choose this war, the people who have no say in whether it happens, they will bear the cost. But here is what I want you to remember: none of this is inevitable. Wars are choices, they are made by specific people for specific reasons, and those people can be pressured, those reasons can be challenged. The American public, if it understood what is being done in its name, would not support this war. The European public, if it understood the economic consequences, would demand their governments refuse participation. The global majority, if it spoke with one voice, could make this war politically impossible. That is why voices like this matter. That is why understanding the real dynamics, not the propaganda, not the manufactured narratives, but the actual forces at play, that understanding is essential, because an informed public is a dangerous public. Dangerous to those who profit from war, dangerous to those who thrive on division, dangerous to the empire that depends on our ignorance. So share this information, talk to your friends and family, challenge the narratives you see in mainstream media, ask the questions that are not being asked. Who benefits from this war? Who pays the cost? Why are American interests being sacrificed for a foreign government? Why is the media that claims to defend democracy openly calling for the assassination of diplomats? These are not comfortable questions, but comfort is a luxury we cannot afford, not when the world stands on the edge of catastrophe, not when the decisions being made in the next few weeks could reshape the global order for generations. The Iranian delegation is now returning home. They went to Islamabad in good faith, despite knowing the odds were against success. They went because they wanted the world to see that Iran is willing to talk, willing to find solutions, willing to compromise where compromise is possible. And the world did see. It saw the United States demand capitulation. It saw American media call for murder. It saw the empire reveal itself. And now we wait. We wait to see whether cooler heads prevail. We wait to see whether the forces pushing for war can be restrained. We wait to see whether humanity can step back from the edge. But while we wait, we prepare. We prepare our minds by understanding what is actually happening. We prepare our communities by building networks of mutual support. We prepare our spirits by remembering that empires rise and empires fall, but the human desire for justice and dignity endures. The coming days will be difficult, the coming weeks may be tragic, but the arc of history bends toward those who refuse to submit. And in that refusal, there is hope. Don't stop here. The world is full of forces shaping our future in ways most people never see. Click on the next video and join me as we continue to cut through the fog of propaganda and reveal what is really happening behind the headlines.